Welcome to Swing State. I'm Fox 8 senior political reporter Bob Buckley, and tonight we are talking to the Republican nominee for Lieutenant Governor, Hal Weatherman, making his first run for office. We're going to talk a little bit about some of your previous experience in politics, but I can tell, people will tell as soon as he opens his mouth here, he's not from New York or Chicago, place like that. You're a definite Southerner.
I was born and raised in North Carolina.
Yeah. What part? Down near Charlotte?
I was born in Charlotte,
okay.
But I split my childhood between half my childhood Charlotte, North Carolina, the other half in a very small town called Elkin, North Carolina, in Surrey County, up near the Virginia line and the foothills of the Blue Ridge Parkway.
That's in our viewing area, and you came this way. You came back this way for college at Wake Forest.
Went to Wake Forest, undergrad, went to a small school called Wheaton College for graduate school up in Chicago.
It's down the road from where I grew up.
Oh yeah?
Wheaton College, and of course is the alma mater of Billy Graham.
Billy Graham, yeah.
And being, I imagine, someone you admire greatly.
Yeah, when I was at, I went to seminary when I was at Wheaton College. I didn't finish from the seminary program. I got a master's in journalism, but I started in the seminary program. That's what brought me there. But I've been back here now for most of my adult life. Did a stint in Washington, D.C., a stint in Texas with a private sector company, but most of it here.
Hazard pay there when you were living in D.C., just for the type of job you have to do there?
You know, I enjoyed being in D.C., but I was much younger then.
Young man's game.
And it was. And as soon as I got married and started having kids, then we wanted to settle down somewhere.
I get that 100%. As we mentioned, you were chief of staff for Dan Forest, as well as for his mother, Congresswoman Sue Myrick.
I was.
What has that informed you about? You know, you've seen this from the inside, but you still want to run, right?
Yeah, there's no false illusion of politics. Yeah. I've been around it for a while, but always behind the scenes. You know, I learned everything really about what I would call the art of politics, which is really public service and relationship building. From Sue Myrick. I mean, she was a master. She was the first female mayor of the city of Charlotte, and then served 18 years with what I would consider with distinction as one of the most conservative members of Congress. But she was very well respected from both sides of the aisle. She treated people with civility and dignity, and she knew how to bring people together. And so I learned so much from her. Plus, she taught me the power of grassroots. You know, she won her first mayor's race against a very popular incumbent mayor, Harvey Gantt.
Yeah.
And she won on the last precinct reporting.
Wow.
So literally in a citywide election, it came down to like 85 votes. And I was there that night. I was a kid and watched it. But everything I learned from her was keep your ear close to the ground. Don't listen to polls. Let your travel around your district or your state be your poll. And of course, that carried over with Dan Forest, which a lot of people don't make the connection that Sue is Dan's mother. They're very similar. They're also very different. They're both workaholics, and which I am as well, type A work. And knew the value of travel. And so when I was with Dan Forest, you know, it afforded me an amazing opportunity to travel the great state of North Carolina. I went to all 100 counties multiple times over a 10-year run with him. He was in office 8, but I was with him for 10 because people forget we campaigned for almost 2 years for the office of Lieutenant Governor. And you see a lot of elements of that campaign, 2012, in my campaign now.
Right, because a lot of people didn't expect him to win that first time, but that being out in the
we were not favored at all. In fact, we were almost laughed out of, the office when we would go tell people we're running for Lieutenant Governor. They're like, you don't have a prayer. And he was only the second Republican elected since 1898, I believe it was.
Well, speaking of that, from the beginning of our republic, vice presidents have claimed that the job of vice president wasn't very significant. One of FDR's vice presidents, John Nance Garner, the Texan, famously said the job wasn't worth a bucket of warm spit. We've heard that phrase before. It kind of looks like North Carolina looked at the federal government and said, well, hold my beer, when we created the lieutenant governor's role. Didn't even have one until after the Civil War, and then it was part-time up to the 1970s. So I'm not trying to make light of the position, but I'm making the point that if you want to produce change, this may not be the first place you look, but it's the first place you're running. So tell me why you're running for this particular position.
Well, first of all, historically, the office of Lieutenant Governor was actually very powerful when it was created. Remember back in the day, up until 1987, when the Democrats controlled the General Assembly, and Jim Gardner was our first Republican elected. The first act of business he had to preside over a Democrat General Assembly Senate was to strip the power of the office. So it's only been since 1987 that the power's been stripped. Prior to that, the Lieutenant Governor sat every member of the state Senate on their committees and had the power to withdraw them, which means it gave them great control over the legislative agenda of the General Assembly. That is now in the President Pro Tem's office, which is Phil Berger.
Right.
And so that's where it is. Listen, I know the duties or the limitations of the office, but I also see the great opportunities of the office. Lieutenant Governor serves on the State Board of Education. Lieutenant Governor serves on the State Board of Community Colleges. And if I have the honor and the privilege to be the Lieutenant Governor of this great state, I'm going to use those two pedestals to what I call do everything in my power to remove the fundamental stigma that our society has put on men and women who work with their hands. I want to drive a whole new generation of people into the trades, into working with their hands. And I think those two pedestals, those two appointments on those boards will help me do that.
You're right, and it's interesting you brought that up. That's next on my agenda to talk about. The one place that the Lieutenant Governor has always had some real influence is education. You're a big supporter of school choice, even though it's not as much K through 12 influence that you have in that position. What does that look like for you?
Well, first of all, my family is a poster child of school choice. I have 3 children. At one time or another, each of my children have gone public, private, Christian, charter, and homeschool. So we have consumed every form of educational opportunity that's out there, and I want every parent in North Carolina to have the same choices that we had. I think the saddest thing that we do as a society is to damn the future outlook, a success of a child based on nothing else but the zip code they're born in. And when you trap a child into a failing school system and they have no other outlet, that's what you're doing. And so I'm a big proponent of school choice.
I was just going to interlude just because we got to get to a break here in a minute, but the opponents of that are going to say a couple of things. One is the establishment in education doesn't like school choice in general, even with charters, but they particularly take umbrage at the opportunity scholarships that allow the money to follow the child where they want it.
I want the money to follow the child.
All right, so they're going to claim that it takes money away from, or that the public schools have to be what they call fully funded first. What do you say to that? Because we're not exactly throwing money willy-nilly at the public schools.
Well, if you're saying, if what they're saying is, if a child decides to leave the public school system and let's say go private or go charter, on average we spend about $10,000 per child on the public school system. Yeah. So what they're saying is when the child leaves the school system, they still want to keep the $10,000.
They do.
I think the $10,000 should go with the child and educate them. Our state constitution guarantees a sound basic education to all children. It doesn't say public education. It means any education. And I think if you've ever been, I was on the startup board of a charter school in Wake County. And our startup, we started on a wing and a prayer. And 4 years later, we have 1,900 students and a waiting list of 1,500.
Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a second. Hal Weatherman isn't the only one on the Republican ticket, of course. So up next, we'll find out how he aligns with the men at the top of the state and the federal tickets. We're back with the Republican nominee for Lieutenant Governor in North Carolina, Hal Weatherman. And before we get on to issues of other candidates, I want to finish our discussion on funding of schools. You mentioned the $10,000. That doesn't put us in a great position as far as total money spent. Does this state need to spend more on either K through 12 education, which has been increased, or higher ed, which has actually in real dollars decreased over the last 10 years?
Well, higher ed's a whole nother subject.
Okay.
Higher ed, I think, is in decline because they're not relevant in today's world. I mean, if you think about it, I can go through dual enrollment at the high school level. A kid can graduate today, high school, as a sophomore in college. They can go to a community college, go through what's called the articulation agreement, take their first 40 hours of credit at a community college, and then transfer them to the UNC school system. By law, the UNC school system cannot block it anymore. They used to be able to. So you have to ask yourself, if you connect all those dots, I can graduate as a sophomore. If I can do my first 2 years at a community college, graduate to a 4-year degree, what's a 4-year degree worth today? 1 year. And there are too many parents now in today's world that are saying, hey, what are we getting for our money?
What about K through 12? Is it funded to the degree it needs to be?
I think it's sufficiently funded. I think they need to always look for efficiency so they spend their money more wisely. But listen, I am a proponent of the backpack model because I don't want to lock a child into a perennial failing school system. I'm not saying all public schools are, but we have multitude of schools around the state generationally that are failing their children, and they have no other option unless you give them another option. If you've ever been to a lottery for a charter school, which is what I was about to say before we went to a break, we have 1,900 students in the charter school I helped start. When you go to a lottery and you see parents who are desperately trying to escape their school system, and they're not selected, their children are not selected, they cry. I've seen multitudes of parents cry, and they're crying because they know their opportunity is lost. And I just don't want that.
Fair enough. All right, so you say prominently that you support Donald J. Trump.
Sure, absolutely.
Can I assume you have the same support for Mark Robinson?
I do.
Okay.
I've endorsed Mark, and Mark has endorsed me.
When you talk about wanting to run a positive campaign rather than one that appeals to people's fears and anxieties, how does that line up with Mr. Trump and Mark Robinson? Because Attorney General Josh Stein has made sure that we see things that Mark Robinson has said in every commercial break on TV. And I think it's fair to say, as a neutral observer, they're not flattering. There's some pretty harsh stuff. How do we put those two ideas together?
Well, listen, campaigns are about opposition research and digging in dirt for people and then throwing it out there. I reject all of that. I'm on the road probably 3-4 days a week with Mark. I'm in a lot of functions where he's speaking, and he lifts up the issues that North Carolinians are concerned about: the high cost of living, the surge in crime rate, fentanyl, the breakdown of the southern border, and the influx of people coming in, able-bodied military-age men coming across the border, coming into our state, that's going to bring terrorism. That's what he's lifting up. And I think what Josh Stein is doing is just going back through history, going back through old Facebook accounts, going back. And of course he is. What else is he going to run on?
Well, Mr. Robinson has made some statements fairly recently about the whole thing about we kill the evil people, the Nazis, et cetera. And I think his campaign is going to say, I was only talking about killing people in wars, not about evildoers. But then they relate that to evildoers like Mr. Biden. And does nothing trouble you about some of these statements? That's all
Mark
I'm asking.
Robinson is not advocating for people to go out and kill Joe Biden. And any rational person knows that. Anybody in that audience that day knew that. He was talking in the context of World War II, talking about defeating Nazism.
Abortion has not been a great issue for Republicans. I want to know where you stand. You know, current law is, there's a Pew poll that I want to show viewers real quickly, and it talks about some of the levels of opposition and support for abortion. When you look at this, the only group that supports it being illegal in most cases, in a majority, are evangelicals, which I think you'd probably list yourself as one. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I am, yeah.
If you look at the other numbers there, though, a majority of people want it legal, at least in some to most cases. Right now in this state, the law, as I understand it, is under 13 weeks, so 12 weeks and 6 days, abortion is still available. What do you want to see the law be in this state?
Well, first of all, major flaw in your poll, major flaw. There's not one of the 98 million children who've been aborted since 1973, not one of them are polled in that.
Right. By the way, it's not my poll, just for the record, it's Pew.
Pew's poll, understood, right? Okay. What would be interesting is if some way you could supernaturally poll those 98 million children who were terminated from 73 on, what percentage do you think would choose life?
Yeah, I remember some prominent people, Jack Nicholson being one of them, who was adopted, and I've never seen a person whose mother chose to have him and was adopted out say, I wish I was aborted.
I've never seen a pro-choice advocate who didn't have a mother who chose life.
Yeah. What do you want to see the law be, though?
You know, I believe life begins in conception. I do. I am an evangelical Christian. I do value life. I want to see a culture of life. I want to see wraparound services for mothers in times of crisis, where we provide the neonatal care that they need, the financial assistance they need, the love and support. You know, they've already, here's a poll, 77% of all women who've had an abortion have claimed they did so because they felt at that moment they had no other choice. I want these emergency pregnancy clinics that we can provide choices to the women where they can choose life.
I think it is fair to say that the political right, the pro-choice movement, does maybe a little too much finger wagging, not enough opening of wallets and homes. Is that fair?
I don't know about that. I'll just simply say this. During this entire campaign, right, every time that Mark Robinson or myself or the Republicans, when we talk about the high cost of living, our opponents are going to talk about abortion. When we talk about surging crime, they're going to talk about abortion. We talk about fentanyl, they're going to talk about abortion.
What should the abortion law be, though? Because we have to make a choice on it. Do we leave it
the
where it is?
law is currently settled. I mean, it was at 20 weeks. Now it's down to 12. I personally would like to see it taken down to what's called the heartbeat bill, which is 6 weeks. Because I think the majority of society recognizes that we define death as when the heart stops. And I think the majority of the society would accept that we should, at a minimum, define life when the heart starts. And I think that's rational.
Yeah, even though President Trump is widely on record saying he does not support a national abortion ban, the Biden campaign keeps claiming that that's his goal.
Well, clearly it's not, because he has now
Right.
punted that to the states,
Right.
and the courts have punted that to the states, and that's why this battle line is now at the state level.
Yeah. All right. Is there a way, are there specific programs, we only have less than a minute here though, specific programs you'd like to see put in place to help pregnant women who don't choose life?
I would like to see emergency pregnancy clinics pop up all over the state. Yes,
Sponsored?
all over the state,
Okay.
state sponsored, where we can provide the neonatal care, access to wraparound services, be it financial. A lot of times it's transportation. A lot of women, younger women, choose abortion because they don't have a form of transportation. They're wondering, how am I going to do this with a baby in a car and all that? Whatever it is, wraparound services, provide the love and the counseling they need, and then streamline the adoption process and make it easier.
Still a lot to talk about, including what the Lieutenant Governor can do to help create jobs, keep North Carolina dollars here in the state, and what to do about immigration. That's all next. We're back with the nominee for Lieutenant Governor in North Carolina, Republican Hal Weatherman. And before the break, we were talking about both the economy and some of the things you advocate, which are the trades, which I think are wonderful. Yeah. And we're seeing a younger generation begin to embrace this. But what can a Lieutenant Governor in particular do to help the economy in this state?
Well, the one thing I want to do about the trades in particular is I want to create a 2-2 degree. I want to use the platform of being on the State Board of Education, State Board of Community Colleges. I want to create a 2-2 degree, a new streamlined degree where kids who are going to go to college first go to a trade school, one of the 58 community colleges. I don't care if it's HVAC, electrical, commercial welding, plumbing, whatever floats their boat. They get their certification, get their associate degree, then they transfer to the UNC school system and they get a stripped down degree. They forget English, forget taking French or foreign language. They know what they want to do. They want to be an entrepreneur and run a business. And so let them at that point get a limited degree in graphic design, marketing, budget, finance. So they have all the tools necessary to run a business, but then couple it with the skill set, the trades, that'll make them profitable. Listen, the fastest way in today's society to make 6 figures, to be an entrepreneur, to be the boss man, control your own destiny, and to build a business that literally within 10 to 15 years you could sell the business entity as a whole for 7+ figures, is to work with your hands. Yet our society continues to push kids into a 4-year degree system where I jokingly say too many of these kids are coming out with degrees in Egyptian poetry. They come out $100,000 in debt and they can't find a job. And I think about artificial intelligence. We hear about this every day, especially in the media. Y'all report it all the time, as you should. With the rise of artificial intelligence, right? Think of the industrial revolution we're about to go through. I think you're getting ready to see wholesale white-collar industries disappear overnight. Yeah. But you know what AI cannot do? It cannot unstuff your toilet when it's plugged up.
But you mentioned that, and I want to make sure, because I think we're on the same track here with this idea that you talk about working with your hands, but those people still work with their minds too. I think there's been this impression that there's no intellect in those jobs, and there's plenty of intellect in those jobs.
100%. That's why I'm actually tackling the issue by encouraging them to go to college.
Yeah.
But to get a college degree that is focused on giving them, listen, I know a lot of people in the trades, and no disrespect, they're more of a mom and pop operation. Yeah. And they're good at what they do with their hands, but they don't necessarily know the business aspect of it. And what I want to do is couple those two together so they can take their mom and pop operation and start to think bigger and start to say, hey, instead of just being a plumber myself, I could have 4 or 5 plumbers working for me. Instead of doing the residential, I go to commercial and build a business. All our skilled tradesmen and women are dying and retiring. Yeah. And there's nobody replacing them. Supply and demand is going to kick in, already is, and these are going to be lucrative fields for our people.
And they will come out of school with less debt too.
Absolutely.
That system. All right. You want to see our government to, as you put it, buy North Carolina, to use purchasing power of money to keep the money home. Let me throw out though, as a conservative, isn't that against free market principles that suggest that you owe the taxpayers the best deal, the best products at the best price, which might not always be North Carolina produced? The economy doesn't, of course, stop at our borders. The American economy is
it's a fair question. It's a fair question. Listen, our state's going to spend about $30 billion a year, regardless of what we do. No new tax revenue, anything. Just we're operating under about a $30 billion. One thing I would like to do is to go through every line of the state budget. I'd like to go through every contract. Think about this. Every contract that the state of North Carolina lets, regardless of what agency it comes from. To my knowledge, this has never been done before, which, by the way, is a transparency red flag. We should know what we're obligating our people to. And then give preferential spending authorities, preferential awarding of contracts. Still make them competitive. They still have to compete for them. They have to be competitively bid. But elevate. Are you a North Carolina homegrown company? And if you are, we're going to elevate you, just like we do currently with our purchasing with veteran-owned companies, minority-owned companies, women-owned companies. I want to say, are you a homegrown North Carolina company? And if you are, I want to spend the money there first. And I'd go one step further. I would like to spread that out to the 85 rural counties of this state. And spread some of the wealth out around the state.
Yeah, because they are struggling to agree. Now, House Speaker Mike Johnson said recently that there's no logical explanation for Democratic opposition to the SAVE Act, which is federal legislation that would require voters to provide proof of citizenship before voting in federal elections. Speaker Johnson says that he thinks they're planning to allow people here who are not here legally to vote. You have experience working with election security. I assume you'd back the SAVE Act?
Yeah, listen, I'm absolutely against illegal aliens being able to vote in any election, be it federal, state, local, or whatnot. And I do think that that's what the Democrat Party is absolutely trying to do. Listen, we have had hundreds of thousands, if not several million, able-bodied, military-aged men come across our southern border. In fact, last year alone, we had more able-bodied, military-aged men, illegal aliens, come across our border than matched the populations of 6 U.S. states. Now, this is non-sustainable. Voting is just one aspect of it. We're going to have homegrown, they're going to call it homegrown jihadi-based terrorism on our soil, including here in North Carolina. The next governor and lieutenant governor of this state will have to deal with terrorism on our state because of a porous southern border. And absolutely, I think the Democrat Party is doing this. The Biden administration is doing this to court their vote.
Tens of thousands of Chinese nationals
Yes.
have come across the southern border.
Venezuela, China, multiple countries.
Countries that want to see our demise. China is buying land near our military installations.
Yeah.
We need to do something about this?
Yes, 100%. The General Assembly's done some of that. I want to go one step further. I don't want to limit Chinese ownership just to land around military installations, which should be obvious. We shouldn't allow it. China is buying our farmland.
Right.
They're buying our farmland. If China controls our farmland, if China controls our food, China controls us. And so we absolutely have to stop it, either at the federal level or state or both.
Is this going to be your last stop, you think, Lieutenant Governor, or are we looking beyond that?
I'm going to go wherever God leads me, wherever I can be of service.
It's been a good run so far for you, though. You've been out meeting the people. And have you been to all 100 counties on this tour?
I was the only candidate who went to all 100 counties in my Republican primary. I went to 35 counties 5 times or more. I went to 10 counties 10 times or more, and then we stopped counting. And so, but no, we're still on the road every day.
Taking too much time.
Listen, the greatest asset of our state are our people, and I get to meet them every day.
That's it for tonight. Remember, we're not just a TV show, we're a podcast. You can get audio versions of this show wherever you get your podcast. Just search Swing State.